Welcome, citizens of the globe, to the Frontend Heroes podcast, where we discuss all things villainous and heroic about the front end of software development. My name is Evan Payne. I'm a senior front-end developer at Actimo, and with me as always is my co-host Scott Francis, a senior front-end engineer at Porsche. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing pretty good. Really looking forward to this. Little break from my everyday life, where I'm currently getting married and buying a house and wrestling with the challenges of a new job, all in the space of 3 months. So pretty hectic schedule at the moment, but yeah, great to have time to do this.
Yeah. No, it's great. Really excited for you on all those fronts. We'll get little snippets as the time goes on in this show, I'm sure, but yeah, well done. Today's episode is sponsored by NetCentric, an award-winning Adobe Global Alliance partner and consultancy headquartered in Switzerland with offices all over Europe as well as Pune, India. They're currently hiring for a number of roles, so if you are looking, check them out. Scott and I vouch for them. We are, as ever, so glad to have their support with this show. This time around, we have a guest we'd like to introduce you to. It is Stephanie Eckles, author of ModernCSS.dev, an egghead instructor, and creator of StyleStage.dev. Stephanie, who are you and how'd you get into this crazy front-end world?
Hi, well, thank you for having me. Yeah, so I have been a professional web developer, mostly focused on front-end, for just over 14 years now for the professional side. Did some, MySpace before that. But I actually started in web development because I was interested in art as a kid. And a series of events led me to go to a camp for Macromedia Flash animation. And that led to wanting to put my art, quote unquote, on the web. And that led to learning about table layout and taking now looking back at it, very critical 1-hour college credit class that finally got me to understand absolute positioning. And from there, just kind of grew. I was a WordPress developer for 10 years. So that was where I mostly got my experiences. I majored in advertising and worked in marketing departments for the majority of my career. Spent a couple years in product, and now I'm back sort of kind of marketing, but not 100%, not directly in the marketing department of what I'm doing, but supporting a marketing website. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it was last year at some point. You came onto my radar, at least, through Twitter and all the things that happened there, for just posting some real thoughtful articles in CSS and things. And I forgot to mention last time the episode title. We try to keep with our superhero motifs, and last time was it was a slim link. This time is even more slim, and the episode title will be The Danger Room, which references X-Men's holographic training chamber thing, and it's a lame attempt to tie that into teaching and learning by literally just diving into the madness that's the modern web. But yeah, I want to talk a bit about that. So one of your projects that's been going on for a while is ModernCSS.dev. It's the website. But how did you start to put it that way? And I mean, maybe you can tell us a bit about what it actually is and what you expect it to be as a resource for people.
Yeah, awesome question. So another part in my career history was that as I kind of had a 4-year sort of hiatus just due to the fact of entering parenthood. And, during that time, I continued working, but I definitely felt like going from kind of really avidly being involved in the web community, to having way less time to do that if it wasn't directly at my job. I myself was falling behind when I kind of emerged from the cave of new motherhood. And so I also at that time was kind of in a career transition to the product team that I mentioned. And that was a new environment, particularly as the kind of sole person in charge of the front end, And so, and I also was becoming more aware and involved with accessibility. And obviously accessibility in front end is extremely closely linked. And so I just was kind of, re-entering what are the available resources right now. And when I kind of got myself back into my regular Twitter network, I realized the conversation about CSS was still ongoing in terms of some of the negative things that it conjures for folks. But meanwhile, CSS had done a ton of growing up. And so, we were finally at that point. So like you mentioned, it was a year ago when I kind of started to put these projects out here. But, we finally can pretty safely use things like Grid. That was kind of what really got me thinking about. I was like, if people don't know Grid exists, I am aware of all the hacks that they're currently doing to get around that when it could be simplified and more enjoyable, I think, too. So I joke that modern CSS is going to be a term I'll have to figure out how to deal with in a decade. But for now, it's an accurate term because I'm really trying to speak to those folks who haven't given it a look in a while and are trying to see what is it capable of, how to upgrade their skills. And something else that has emerged alongside that is trying to highlight, not directly, but as a subtopic, that maybe these tools that we're using aren't letting you use all the features of CSS to its fullest. So providing you with not just a tutorial, but the tutorial makes a actual outcome, but hopefully also passing along some other skills that you can just kind of generally add to your toolbox.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, like we said previously, we had someone else also CSS focused that we brought on the show, and you would think we wouldn't have what to talk about. But Scott, you and I were talking about this earlier. It is just exploding lately with things to know and learn about.
To that point as well, I think that the name modern CSS, like, that's not going to be a problem for you. Like, that's just going to roll and roll.
It's going to grow.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I mean, yeah, sure. Look back on some posts like 4 years old or something, and it's going to be like, well, that isn't modern CSS, but I mean, it was at the time, and the ones that you'll be pushing out then as well will definitely be. I mean, yeah, exactly what Evan was saying. It does feel like there's just so much new stuff at the moment, and like always something new.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any ways that you sort of keep on top of that? I mean, yeah, okay, you hear around the web that this thing or that thing is coming out. We've talked about logical properties before, and certainly the hot topic is container queries. But, do you specifically, like some people I know, troll the working groups and see what they're working on or review those sorts of things?
I troll the working group people.
Nice.
So, yeah, I think just curating who I follow on Twitter is my primary method. I've also increased, subscribing to newsletters and various things over the last year. And those, especially the kind of, the not directly working group people, but, the folks just kind of like myself who are just interested and passionate about it, they surface a lot of cool stuff that people are doing. So, so newsletters and Twitter is the main way I keep apprised.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The same as I do. I want to pivot a little bit into, yes, we're learning all these things about new features, and I do want to talk a bit about some of the things that you're most excited for recently. But I know many of us are still dealing with Internet Explorer 11, which holds us back from the evergreens and full support for some of these features. But let's collectively imagine a scenario where we are suddenly released from that burden. The last client holdout, whatever, drops support for that. And hey, now we don't have to worry about IE11. We can move on to the modern browser sets. How do we then approach refactoring or progressively enhancing or getting to use these new features in a way that's not going to, necessarily drastically require a rewrite of the code base entirely? I mean,
great question.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think there's some small ways that, for me, again, just kind of given my history of being on different types of teams and products, to me, the number one thing that jumps to mind is not literally CSS Grid, but upgrading Grid systems, for sure, is like maybe a ease-in point to start in a code base, because it's so impactful. But you can, especially when you're but it's kind of a tumbling effect too, because you start there, but it affects probably every component that you have going on, and consequently then every layout you have going on. So probably the most impactful one, and the other one would be incorporating CSS custom properties. But there again, not every project needs them. They're a convenience. So it's one that's exciting. It's one that I'm slowly incorporating into my own work, partially from a support standpoint, but also partially because I think it's an easy place to get a little unwieldy as well in organization. But the other thing that makes that a little tricky to answer is, we're months away from that being hopefully a reality, or starting to become a reality. But we're also months away from not just container queries, but some of these other things that are completely going to change how we manage CSS. So, literally top to bottom. So, I think we're on the cusp of everyone, regardless of, support. But if you're involved and sort of, if you care about how your CSS is constructed and where it comes from, we're all about to experience a huge shift in how we approach it in general. So a little tricky to answer right now, but just because I'm excited and forward looking.
Yeah, we can come to that momentarily as well. I just want to ask you, Scott, as well. I'm not entirely clear. You're working on some sort of greenfield stuff now, or are you also doing sort of older code base catch-ups?
No, I'm totally greenfield now.
Yeah. So
yeah, I've left Internet Explorer behind.
Huzzah! Yeah, I'm in the refactoring game, and that's fine. I'm doing a lot of JavaScript right now, so the CSS can wait for a little while anyway. But yeah, with you, what have you been doing like CSS wise lately? That's made it feel new again.
You know what? Honestly, the other day I did a pull request. I reviewed a request, and was actually able to tell somebody, "Have you considered using aspect ratio for this?" Like, and I honestly, I felt like a boss. I felt like a CSS god. I was like, "Have you considered this?" And they were like, "No, I didn't know that this existed." I'm like, "Well, maybe we should use it." But like. Small things, they make you happy in web development. Sure. But yeah, that was something that sprung to mind. We also provided a fallback for this, because it isn't 100% supported across the browsers. So we provided a fallback for this, which kind of increased the we could have stuck with the padding solution, and not included the fallback. But to me, it is better it felt better to go with the aspect ratio and provide the fallback. We can easily take the fallback out, and we know why it's there, and we can search for these things at a later date, just to do every 6 months do a sweep of the code. Do we still need this? And I feel like that fallback is kind of a little marker that you can put in your code into your CSS for yourself, and just go and tidy things up later on. I just think it's nice to start using the things, especially because it starts embedding into this is now standard practice. We'll actually just use this instead of the other solution. That's how I would try and keep things fresh. It mainly is read about something. Okay, let's give this a shot. Let's give it a shot straight away, instead of before. I think I would have been inclined to think, oh, well, it's not supported everywhere, so it's too much hassle to put in. Now my attitude is very much, let's get it in. Let's try using it.
Yeah, I think there's a level of security that's come along with these changes. Again, we've touched on it before, but the way that CSS Grid got into the browsers was very well thought through and efficient, and ended up with a pretty good end result. And it has continued to be the case. So there's a level of trust developing, as it's not going to be like it was back in the day. And yeah, we're able to use these solutions more quickly. So let's talk about the exciting paradigm shifts that are coming. What did you have in mind when you were saying that just then?
Yeah, so container queries is the most tangible, since it's actually got an experiment out. But the other ones that are also being done by Miriam Suzanne are layers and scope. And I definitely haven't dove into those as much, but they both are going to impact literally how you even write your style sheet at all. So it's not just properties we're talking about, but what's actually, affecting the organization of things, and in different ways. But I think the other interesting thing about that, I was just thinking about it this morning, was, when we talk about CSS frameworks, and they kind of have a certain way that they're formed, but these new things like layers and scope are going to drastically alter that. I think that's where we're going to see one of the biggest shifts is, do those make sense anymore? Or do you want to move off of them? Or, we'll obviously see new ones come out that can take advantage of these new things. But it's going to be very interesting. It's just going to be kind of mind bending for everyone for a while when they're available, which I think is exciting. I'm loving watching everything move forward and see all the new stuff come out. But
So, I mean, I can grasp from the titles what they are, but and don't worry if it's too new to talk about. But if you have some sort of idea of like what would layers bring to the table, like what is this going to look like? Not look like. I don't mean that because it's new. But like what's problems it's trying to solve?
Yeah. So, and again, I have a kind of very, very high level
Sure.
understanding at this point. Miriam has 2 explainers on both of these, so you can definitely dive deep in those for anybody interested.
Cool.
But layers are, in a way, like, to an extent, not, this isn't 100% their purpose, but to an extent, they're sort of like imports, and particularly in SAS, sort of, kind of. So you can use them to bring in different parts of your style sheet and use them to modify the cascade itself. So they're actually, the full name is Cascade Layers. And what's interesting about that, if we do kind of, just for the moment, again, it's not a one-to-one, but kind of think of it as SAS imports, if that's familiar to you. You could bring in Bootstrap or something, a framework, go ahead and bring it in, but using layers, that would help you modify the cascade and specificity and overriding and those sorts of things. So that's partially my current understanding of kind of what it's addressing, is helping you better orchestrate the cascade and what parts are included. The interesting thing about that is you can also, or at least the current proposal, is that kind of on a per page basis, you could modify the order of those layers coming in. So if you have your reset and different other bits, maybe you don't need it the same, or have some reason to alter it, per page, you can actually define that. So just very unique, interesting way that's going to be working. It does not have experiments or anything right now, so very, very early, but definitely want to keep an eye out in the working group.
Yeah.
So.
I really love how, especially in the front end, and I know this is true in other parts of tech world, and I'm just being super like biased to my own areas, but it feels like we're constantly questioning the status quo here and being like, yeah, this has not always been a pleasant experience. What can we do to change that? This is fine. Can we make it better? Just over and over and over again. And even, like Houdini was the buzzword a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's still going and has some really interesting applications, though I haven't seen much because I never bothered to enable it or play around in Chrome Canary. But still, it's this idea of like, let's mess around with the Paint API and like change how the browser is rendering everything. Let's have hexagons instead of like boxes, box model, that sort of stuff. I love that. I love that about the front end. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So another topic which we need to talk about, I guess, is teaching. I mean, writing articles is a form of teaching. I know it's also a form of self-learning too. Like when I write something, I learn it really well. But you've been doing a lot of courses. You're on Egghead. You have some other stuff that's coming up workshop-wise. How does that jive for you? Like, what I mean by that is it's a different sort of a discipline than front end, but I see a lot of front enders that embrace it wholeheartedly. Do you think there's an overlap there, and what draws you to it?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that, to draw that parallel. And so for myself, like I mentioned, I kind of had an initial reason. It got me started writing. Um, and in my own experience, writing kind of led to some other opportunities, is partially why I got into teaching. My actual initial goal before I started writing was to put out a video course for web design or web development for beginners. And it's kind of embarrassing to look back on now, even though it was just a year ago. But that was my initial starting point. And I think it's just, just like writing or opening a new project, it's, what did I learn? Maybe somebody else will find this useful. And then, I've definitely evolved how I approach teaching and thinking of it that way. It was also initially for the writing, just kind of, a more formal way to share ideas. But it sort of evolved for me to actually thinking of it in a teaching format, and definitely still learning. But the Egghead helped a lot. They have their own kind of approach to that. So, of course, kind of moving into their way of thinking about things, like, when you teach a lesson on Egghead, it's meant to be kind of the size of a commit. And that was a useful way to think about it. So, really scoping in, honing down what the topic at hand was. And I've kind of carried that through some other materials, or that thought of, progressively building something out as well. But that's interesting, again, how you said the overlap there. And the ones that I see it do it, I think that there's a desire to share more about the ecosystem too. So it's partially teaching, it's partially sharing new ideas, but also kind of desire to kind of lift everybody up and make them aware of what the web is capable today. So whereas I say, very specifically modern CSS, there's obviously so much else going on, and it's tricky to keep track of. So if you can teach well, and you can teach to not just beginners, but all levels, I think that's really valuable. And it's cool. It's cool to me to see a lot of more folks doing that and sharing their own voice and perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a really important thing, like for the community. I mean, it's always Evan's right. Like the community's always been there to support each other. But I actually think it's in the last few years, it's really become like a lot better. Like ever since we, I can tell from you describing like your first experiences in web development that like it's similar to mine. And the first things I can really remember about the web community was basically just getting abused on Stack Overflow for asking any kind of question. Like now, when I look from like that point to where we are now with resources like your own and people like yourself, like actually taking a real interest in like what's going on, like in these working groups, so that you can actually share this. I think that the community's like moved on like so much that it's just like a fantastic thing to see, and just like it really does help regenerate everybody and lift everybody up. So I mean, like, congratulations for that. Do you think that it's become like in the last like year or so, it's become easier for you as you've like dared to actually like put some material out there and really I suppose I'm thinking along the lines of, would you recommend that somebody who's actually thinking of doing something similar but doubts themselves, like just takes the plunge and really like learns as they go along?
Yeah, I really do. A huge part for me was getting over the fear of pushing publish. um, and I really mean that. And that was huge for me. Basically, why I didn't do any blogging consistently for most of my career is, right about the time that I was starting to get serious about web design and development, Ethan Marcotte published Responsive Design, right? And overnight, it seemed like our worlds flipped. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's people with these literal world-changing ideas. What do I have to offer to the conversation? And it took me over a decade to realize that's silly. Just share it. You never know who's going to, pick up on that and find it useful. So I absolutely do encourage anybody to just start. And it might not be writing. It might be doing YouTube. It might be doing, I think recently I'm enjoying Dev Talk on TikTok. So it might be a 30-second, whatever. It might be silly. But I think the other part for me is like the networking part and growing who I'm also learning from. So and I am kind of personally, I have different media that I publish too. So I haven't gone full in on YouTube, but I have a little bit out there. So it doesn't have to be this grand thing every time. I also encourage folks to start on existing platforms like the dev community, just because you start to just kind of learn, like, what do you even like to put out there? And you get a little bit of feedback, especially on that platform. It's usually supportive, or at least you get the emoji feedback, and that's still nice when you're first starting. Is anybody seeing this at all? Rather than trying to maintain your own platform. It took me a while to move completely to my own platform, actually. That was another thing that held me back initially, is not wanting to super maintain my own thing and worry about all the related things to that. And that's a whole other side of it if you do start to get more involved. And we could talk forever about just that side of it too. But so there are some considerations, and but I say just get comfortable with pushing publish, and then you can start to branch out and find other platforms, other mediums. Being able to talk to other folks, whether it's podcasts or something, has also been awesome to just even figure out what's available. So, just for anybody, just kind of paying attention to what are people publishing on and things too, I think is valuable.
Yeah, that is exactly where I want to go next, actually, is, okay, so you've gotten to a certain level. What do you use to take it to the next step? But I do want to backtrack, and I absolutely agree with you. Publishing on Dev2, using someone else's platform to get going, to see what makes you comfortable, is a great sort of low intensity way to dip your feet in the water, dip your toes in the water. And maybe the blogging is not the best for you, but the point that I've always loved, I'm sure I've said it on our show before, we've done enough episodes now that I'm forgetting what I've said, but is, that padding hack you talked about earlier, Scott. That was exciting back in the day, we didn't have the aspect ratio thing yet, and that's fine. But when someone was like, I've been dealing with this stuff, I just want some aspect ratio. They're like, oh, have you heard of the padding top hack? I was like, what? I was a higher, in the hierarchy of things than they were, but I hadn't heard about it at that stage. And so you don't know what you're sharing, who that'll have an impact on. And there's so much content out there, but that also means that the likelihood is that you will be publishing something that someone has published before, but that no one else has seen before. If that makes sense. I think it's a great time to be doing that sort of stuff, and it will help people immensely.
I would say that the worry about duplication is in the end not a worry, because there's enough of us. We wouldn't all read the same article. It sometimes feel like we have, maybe a newsletter goes round, and then suddenly at work people are all sharing something that they've read on that. But and that would be a worry that I would have, somebody else has already covered this. But we don't all read the same sources. So even if it is covered in 10 other places, you could still reach an audience that may not have seen it. Maybe your style of writing is different to somebody else's. There's preferences, that's certainly, I would see how it's easy to think that that's a barrier. But then if you do think that it's a barrier, then two friends who sit chatting at work about things that they're doing don't start a podcast. So, so I think take the plunge.
All right. So then you've taken the plunge. You've gotten a degree of comfortableness with whatever you're using. One of the things that you've also published, Stephanie, is this thing on 11D. I know super little about 11D. I've looked at it briefly. One of the articles I wrote on CSS tricks back in the day was kind of doing my own, taking a bunch of markdown files and turning them into a blog using Vue. Super outdated now because everyone else has done it better. But that obviously is an approach of getting static sites and figuring out how you're going to self-publish without having to pay for WordPress hosting. So can you talk a little bit about that, and if that's what you use and what you liked about it and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I think I'm an unofficial ambassador for 11D at this point. So for those that don't know, 11D is one of many, but a static site generator. And a few differentiating features for it are its speed, both in build time, and then also there's no, like versus something like Gatsby, which I do have experience with as well, there's no required client-side JavaScript bundle. So in other words, you are purely static until you yourself add in, some of those other things. So you're certainly not prevented from adding in JavaScript or whatever you need. And about the speed part too, it's interesting. The community kind of recognizes that and really pushes it. The creator, Zach Leatherman, he actually has a side project called Speedlify. So the community, if you submit your 11D site, you actually get ranked. I think he does it bi-weekly, based on your Lighthouse score. So anyway, so for myself, when I'm, all of my projects that I have out there, blogs, of course, but some other things too. Again, I have a background in WordPress, and what I like about 11D is that for me, and especially versus something like Gatsby, I enjoy that it doesn't impose too many opinions. Some people like more structure. I like the less structure. It also, a huge differentiating feature is it allows 10 different templating languages. So you can do just HTML and CSS. That's fine. You don't have to pull in any other templating. For me, I initially was gravitated towards it because I could write in Markdown, and it automatically did the transform. No extra steps involved, just right out the gate. There's no such thing as, there is such thing as plugins. They're not required. So again, coming from WordPress, not having that dependency, not having that, fragility sometimes, or security loophole, was huge. So that's another important point, is that 11D is considered part of Jamstack. So there's no database required. Of course, it's all static. So for myself, all of my projects all benefit from that. I tend to publish to Netlify, so I use serverless a little tiny bit, but not much. So you can kind of layer it in as your project grows in complexity, but otherwise you can just use it as a just static flat file server as well.
Do you find that, as you have become more comfortable and familiar with it, that it kind of has gotten out of the way? I ask because I also got started professionally doing WordPress stuff. Before that, it was just tinkering around, and that was like the first time I got paid. And it always felt like a constant struggle to not just like build the site and do the templating and all of that, but then to maintain it and keep the plugins updated and make sure the hosting was done and figure out the uploads and all of that stuff. And then by the time all of that was running and sorted, I didn't have any energy left to actually do anything with the blog. Is this better? Has it given you more freedom to create?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to earlier when I said, it took me a long time. Well, part of it was exactly what you just mentioned, was like, I knew how to do, anything I wanted to with WordPress. But it's still an immense amount of overhead. 11D, I get up and running and a project out the door in a few hours, depending on how formed it is in my own mind, and how much time I spend on design. That's usually where I spend more time than anything. So the initial get up and go, less than 10 minutes to do your initial site setup. And I truly mean that, even if you are, just getting started with it, because you can start just directly from your site root, create your index file, and away you go. So very, very quick startup. And then, like I said, layer in what you need. So for me, if you've heard me talk about it before, I call it my enabler. I think I have over 20 projects that use 11D at this point, including all my blogs.
Nice.
So.
Nice. Yeah. That's a lot of projects.
Yeah, some of those are course related, but most of them are published.
Cool. I actually used it. I used 11D with a small team that was working on a little project. And yeah, we used it, got things up and running, as you said, like super fast. It was super easy to create the content. Yeah, I'd really recommend it. Like it was, yeah, just I was amazed at how quick it was, to be honest. Yeah, like I couldn't speak highly enough of it. Like I have limited experience with WordPress. I have used it, but not like you guys have. And I have to say, it's like a world away from that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the I've liked for a long time the Jamstack paradigm, and I've used Netlify for a long time as well because it made it so much easier to get hosting. I know there's Zeit and Now and a few other things that do a similar thing. Go for it, like whatever makes it easier for you. But I like the Jamstack like paradigm of like try not to do everything with JavaScript, right? Like pre-render some stuff. It'll be better. A lot of this stuff doesn't have to be dynamic content, or at least not in that way. If you're rendering, your pre-rendering, so to speak, is efficient and fast enough, then why do you need it to be using some, in-depth framework? The one thing I worry about for myself with 11D is that I do kind of like opinions. I've had trouble with React in the past because it's not opinionated, and when you're approaching something new, it's hard to know what you should use. When you can choose everything, it makes it. I have a real tough time with blank pages. I'll say it that way. So I gravitated towards Angular, which has loosened up over the years, but what is much more opinionated.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a question. That's just me commenting on. Yeah.
And 11D, I'll just say one last thing, like, versus WordPress or Gatsby or, other more established static site generators, there currently is not a concept of themes. It's just not really, doesn't really jive with the ecosystem, but there is a concept of starters. So if you do want more opinions, there is quite a few starters at this point. So, yes, they're probably going to give you a little bit of style, but that's not really the focus. The focus is more features. So if you want an RSS feed, if you want it to link to a specific CMS, if you do want it to come already with some CSS framework. So those exist if you are, looking to have a little bit of opinion provided for you to get started from.
Nice. Okay, so one maybe, I don't know, final topic I kind of want to cycle back around to is when talking about, getting back into, let's reapproach this from an angle of accessibility. So, I mean, what is your sort of take on how that's going lately in our industry? I mean, we haven't had a proper full-on show on accessibility yet. Both Scott and I have done a fair amount of work in that, but not as much as we know we should, I would say. I feel like it's getting better, that the outreach work that certain advocates have been doing has made an impact. Do you share that, and where do you think it's headed in the next few years?
Yeah, I feel that I've seen a lot of improvement in terms of attempts being made for education. That doesn't, of course, translate to actual implementation necessarily, but we're getting a lot more high quality resources, even just in the last couple weeks. Sarah Sweden and also Marcy Sutton both announced accessibility courses, which are going to be fantastic. And then there's, I would say the quality of material has greatly improved. So I'd say there's less of a reason not to start learning about it. Again, I know that doesn't mean it's being implemented. It was one of my motivations. I include information as applicable in my own materials. And that would be the one area I'm hoping to see more growth, is that gets included in more folks' materials. And particularly, when you create a demo, just being aware that folks are going to pick that up point blank and drop it into their product. And so if you're not including accessibility, or trying to promote the education, that's an area I would love to see more growth in and more improvement in. I think that's again, back to the point of, when you're teaching and creating materials, trying to lift the community as a whole. And I think that's one way, an additional way to make some improvements.
Yeah. I think it's why, teams like at Microsoft or some of those bigger organizations, that they're maybe in a better position than others because they can, do the sort of the tooling like the Narwhal build time tools to sort of scan for certain things and iterate on that as well. Which a lot of us smaller teams, they might be able to get it into their pipeline, but to also iterate on it and improve it as the landscape changes underfoot isn't always that easy. It can make it so that people that are outreaching, like the dev advocates, always do have that good base of accessible demos ready to go, which leads to then more people having it just sort of pre-baked when they extend upon it. Again, it's this thing of we're in a good age. This is like a new golden age of front-end development.
Yeah, it definitely is. Like when I first started my career pretty early on, because I worked like for government, accessibility was a big thing. But it was easy to, once I stepped outside of that, then like there wasn't much championing of it. Like, and it was, I think it was almost like the threat of being held accountable, like in the public arena, which was really driving that. But honestly, I think that's real. Like government and government organisations get like a bad press with in terms of innovation. But I have to say, in the UK, gov.uk did some like fantastic stuff with accessibility, and they should as a resource, just that site is a real great example. So like a little bit of credit to the UK. Like they do get we do get some things right, even though I'm not there anymore. But I think that in that instance, it was very much like the government leading like the private sector, and it really has created like a lot more focus. Just recently, I changed my jobs, and already I see it within the new company that there is real focus on accessibility, which is something that definitely wasn't the case like 7-8 years ago.
Cool.
All right, so we're getting towards the end of the show, but first we have our segment True Hero, and in this segment we like to highlight a few true front-end heroes that are working across the planet and to thank them for all that they do. So this time our nominee is Nick Taylor. You might know him from Dev.to, but Stephanie, will you tell us a bit about him and why you nominated him?
Yeah, so from being a writer on Dev.to, my paths crossed with Nick about a year ago, but he's definitely one of those people that is a huge supporter but doesn't get noticed. And so I just wanted to draw a little attention his way because I think what he's doing, not just for Dev, but the community at large, is really great. And we just need more folks like him that genuinely support everything that's going on, and regardless of what it is, just is happy that the web's moving forward. So
absolutely. So again, Nick, thank you for all that you do. Lastly, here, any proper hero is a well-rounded one, so we like to share some simple musical or audio picks. So Scott, what's the favorite thing you've been listening to lately?
Well, last week I was watching the new season of Handmaid's Tale, and I think it was like the second episode. There was suddenly Suffragette City by Bowie started playing, and I was like sitting there just like nodding along, which is not something I expected to this program, because man does it's just keeps on getting worse and worse. But I was sitting there and I just suddenly thought, wow, God, David Bowie was absolutely amazing, and I've kind of like hadn't listened to him for a while, so I went back and listened to Aladdin Sane, which is just like such a good album. Like I could have internal debates with myself about like whether Ziggy Stardust or Aladdin Sane is like the best album of his, or like and then go around like to try and decide who's like better than Bowie. But I would recommend everybody should go and listen to Aladdin Sane.
Okay. Stephanie, what about you?
So again, I'm a mom and have 2 young girls. And so I couldn't help but get drawn into the soundtrack for Greatest Showman. And in particular, so I've started listening to that as my background track too. But and I'm not really a sappy person. This is a little out of character for me, but the song "Million Dreams," "Million Dreams for the World We're Gonna Make." I can't help but like be inspired by that. We're all kind of emerging in a way, or hoping to, within the very near future. And I don't know, that one just seems like the right song for the time right now.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. These things come into your field of awareness when you need them, and yeah, it's a good one to have on cue. For me, I also went a little bit back into the scrolling through Spotify's new UI. I'm not going to say anything about that, but going through the older records that I had saved up there, and came around to Mumford and Sons, their debut album, Sigh No More. I mean, it was good at the time. It has aged so well. It's like 10 years old now, something like that. It is still so good. Good stories, good crunchy vocal singing and harmonies, and it's just good. I don't know. There's some music that just lasts, and I think this for me is one of them. So putting that out there again. Great. So looks like that is all the time we have for today, folks. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you should like, heart, or star us in your podcatcher of choice. Reviews and ratings are how those fancy algorithms help people find our content. The power to help is within you. If you have any questions or topics you want covered in our next episode, send a tweet to us at Heroes Frontend. We'll add it to our list. Stephanie, thank you so much for being on the program. Until next time, heroes, remember, with great front-end power comes great responsibility. See you next time.